Chapter 2041. He had told Gu Mei that she had taken something useless, but in Boyi's database. It was an important and confidential document. Gu Mei's blood froze. She looked at Yi Muyun in disbelief. Mr. Yi, how is that possible? I spent so much effort on it. Yes, but you didn't participate in the subsequent experiments. Everything that happened afterwards showed that it was a failure. Gu Mei, I'm sorry. He had to get rid of her now, because she was a stone blocking Boyi's acquisition of glory. He had given her a chance. Even though he had said that, she still had no intention of turning back. Yi Muyun walked to his desk and pressed the intercom. His voice was calm as he said, "Call security. Also call the police." When Gu Mei was taken away, she didn't resist at all. She looked a little dazed. She didn't help Zhou Chongwang, but her only role was to let Zhou Chongwang know how unshakable Yi Muyun was. Gu Zhe still saw Gu Mei. He couldn't bear to see her again, but he couldn't blame Yi Muyun. Gu Mei lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Brother, I know what you want to say. It's my fault. I'm too naive." She looked up at Gu Zhe, her lips trembling. Gu Zhe forced himself to be cruel. "Gu Mei, I can agree to any conditions, but I won't interfere with Glory's matters. I won't betray Mr. Yi. Family was family, but faith was another matter." Gu Zhe was Gu Mei's brother. He had done so much for her. At the same time, he was a man, and he had his own ambitions. Gu Mei froze. She roughly understood Gu Zhe's thoughts. "I understand, brother." Gu Zhe watched as she was taken away. He clenched his fist and punched the wall. Yi Muyun stood behind him and said softly, "If you leave Boyi, I can let Gu Mei out. She won't have to go to jail." Gu Zhe's body stiffened. He slowly turned around and looked at Yi Muyun. "Does Mr. Yi not trust me?" "No, I trust you too much. So, I'll give you a chance to choose." Yi Muyun smiled faintly. "Gu Zhe, actually, there's nothing wrong with being emotional. Really, everyone could be swayed by their emotions, but he couldn't. Others could not understand his feelings. He desperately climbed up the ladder and used 2 years to accomplish what others took 20 years to do. Behind all this was because he loved someone. Gu Mei was going to jail, but that was because she liked Zhou Chongwang. She was willing to do it, so he gave Gu Zhe a choice. This choice was too generous for Gu Zhe. From the bottom of his heart, he would rather Gu Zhe let Gu Mei go. The reason why Gu Zhe couldn't stay was probably because he didn't want to see his own mercy. Gu Zhe didn't hesitate. "I won't leave Mr. Yi." Yi Muyun's expression was a little dazed. After a while, he chuckled. "Maybe one day, you'll regret it." With that, he turned back to his office and came out with his car keys. Gu Zhe was no longer there. Yi Muyun thought for a while and went down one floor. He stood outside the blinds and saw Gu Zhe smoking in his office. His expression wouldn't be good. He suddenly felt that Gu Zhe's dilemma was very similar to his. But he couldn't let Gu Mei go, whether it was because of his principles or the company's interests. Chapter 2042. He had lied to Gu Mei that the information was actually useful. However, after she had stolen it, he had decided to scrap it. The biggest taboo for a new product was releasing it 2 days before your press conference. If your opponent grasped the technology and released it before you did, Yi Muyun had no choice but to give up on the research and development cost of hundreds of millions. This was what Gu Mei had to bear. When he got in the car, he called Cher. She was at home. He could not help but think that she would definitely kick up a fuss if she knew about it. After all, she quite liked Gu Mei. When the car stopped at Pei Garden, Sisterly had already come over. She whispered, "She hasn't been downstairs for the whole day. Is she unhappy again?" "No. Sisterly, you're thinking too much." Yi Muyun smiled. "I'll go up and take a look. Prepare dinner." Just when he was about to go up, Sisterly tugged at his sleeve. He turned to look at the old lady. The old lady who had served Pei Chi-Chi before. Sisterly had some prestige in Pei Garden. She coughed. "Young master, can you control yourself in the future? After all, Missy is still young." She hadn't even celebrated her birthday, and she was already out for the night. Wasn't it a little too soon? Yi Muyun thought of the hickey on Cher's neck and knew that Sister Lee had misunderstood. He said softly, "No, no." Sister Lee's gaze became meaningful. How could young master endure it after kissing and nibbling like that? Besides, Missy was so pretty and she was from a young family. Would there be a problem with young master? Sisterly was really worried. Nothing had happened in the past 2 days. Previously, she was worried about messing around. Now, she was worried about young master's health. Sisterly was very conflicted. Looking at her expression, Yimuyun knew that she was overthinking. He said softly, "Didn't you say that Cher is still young?" Sisterly laughed dryly. "Yes, she is still young. Prepare to eat," Yimuyun said and went upstairs. When he went up, the little girl was still curled up on the sofa. There were a few open bags of snacks on the small table, scattered all over the place. "Why don't you go down to eat?" He squatted down to help her pack up her things and asked softly. "Oh," Shuer replied, then looked at him. "I saw you on the news." He was prepared and smiled. "What else did you see?" Cher stared into his eyes. "Gume went to Rongguang, didn't she?" "Yes, she likes Zhou Chengguang. She should have told you." Yimuyun's voice has been light, as if he was chatting with her. Cher didn't say anything and just looked at him. After a while, she asked carefully, "Will you deal with Gume? If she betrays the company, I think I will." He placed his hand on the back of hers. "You like her that much?" "No, I just feel that." "Guze, you should remember that Guze has been with you for so many years." Cher lowered her eyes. Yimuyun lifted her little chin and forced her to look at him. He asked seriously, "Are you pleading for Gume?" She knew that pleading for Gume wouldn't annoy him, so she nodded. "Yes." Indeed, he did not lose his temper. He merely stated calmly, "Gume peeked at the company's confidential information and is now in the detention center. I gave her a chance, but she insisted on helping Zhou Chengguang." Snow was dumbfounded. He was trapped in the clouds. After a long time, she asked hesitantly, "Can you let her go?" Chapter 2043. She knew that her request was a little too much, but she still wanted to beg him. He just looked at her for a long time before saying, "Guze has given up on saving her." He didn't say such a cruel thing, but just told her the truth. Shuer was stunned again. "Guze, he's not going to care about Gume anymore." Yimuyun's voice was very calm. "Because he is a man, and he has his own ambition." Cher's heart sank. If he had his own ambition, what about her brother? Did he have one? Would he give up on her for his ambition one day? No. He seemed to know how to read minds and quickly answered her question. "Cher, this kind of thing will never happen to us." She didn't know that to him. She was his whole world. Cher leaned into his arms for a long time before saying softly, "Then can I beg you?" With that, she knelt up and took the initiative to kiss the corner of his mouth. She kissed him passionately, and her little hands hugged his waist and slowly moved to his neck. Yimuyun looked down at her, and his voice was cold with a trace of unconcealable dullness. "Are you seducing me because of her?" "No." She sat in his arms and learned to coax him. "It's because I want to kiss you." He smiled and lifted her a little higher, almost holding her in his hands. "That's not how you kiss. Baby, let me teach you." After saying that, she whimpered. He said kiss, nothing else. But all of that had really happened. She bit her lip and endured the feeling of shame. Not only was he shameless, but he also forced her to do shameless things. In the end, she couldn't take it anymore and moaned softly. And when he pressed his forehead against hers, the distance between them was so close that it was even more touching than the entanglement of their lips and teeth. Cher had always wanted to find a chance to talk to him about Gume, but he took her downstairs for dinner. After dinner, he also seemed to be very busy and went to the study to deal with work. She waited for him in the bedroom for a long time until she couldn't take it anymore and fell asleep on the pillow. Late at night, when it was almost dawn, Yimuyun finished his work and returned to his bedroom. He loosened his tie and looked deeply at her sleeping figure. In order to not give her another chance to beg, he cruelly avoided her. She must have waited for a long time. What happened to Rongguang was initially a personal revenge, but it was different now. Rongguang was a family business with a solid foundation. Just the street that Rongguang occupied was worth the price he paid. Just as he had said, all men were ambitious. Guze was ambitious, and so was he. He would never give up on acquiring glory for Cher. He had said that he wanted to give her the whole world, and on the road to success, He didn't care how much blood his hands were stained with. He just wanted her to be clean, and he was destined to be stained with darkness. How many people in the business world were clean? Or perhaps it was because his world was gray, so he especially longed for a clean world. Yi Muyun took a shower and held her in his arms as if he had received spiritual salvation. Her small body nestled in his arms, so natural. Chapter 2044. She repeated it a few times, but his face was darker than the night. In her heart, he had always been the executioner who hurt Zhou Chongwang and Gu Mei. In her heart, was he cruel? And was her flattery not sincere? Was it just a plead for mercy? Yi Muyun's eyes were stained with a layer of darkness, and he kept looking at her sleeping face. The next day, when Cher woke up, Yi Muyun was no longer in bed. She looked everywhere but couldn't find him. She looked at the time. It was only 8 o'clock. He usually hadn't gone to the company at this time. She ran downstairs in only her pajamas. When she saw Sisterly, she stuck her head out and asked, "Where's brother?" Sisterly smiled and said, "Young master went out early in the morning. He said he was going to the company. He also told Miss to eat more. If you don't want to go to school, you can stay at home. Young master will ask the chauffeur to pick you up for lunch at the company." To Sister Lee's surprise, Cher went upstairs again. As she ran, she shouted, "I want to go to school." Sister Lee shook her head and wondered, did the sun rise from the west? Miss, who doesn't like to go to school, is actually willing to go to school. However, Sister Lee soon cheered up. Well, it's always a good thing to love to study. In the future, when Miss gives birth to a child, it will also depend on the genes, right? Sister Lee thought like this. The little girl had already come downstairs. She was wearing a wool skirt and a light pink coat outside. She looked very bright. Cher ate her breakfast quickly. While eating, she asked, "Is Uncle Zhao waiting at the door?" Sister Lee's face was full of smiles and love. "I just passed it down. It'll be just right after breakfast." Cher nodded and lowered her head to eat her breakfast. Sister Lee looked at her cute little girl and thought in her heart, "She's so beautiful, not worse than Madame when she was young. No wonder young master likes her so much." Speaking of the young master, Sister Lee was really convinced. The young master came to the Tang family at the age of 10. She had seen the hard work he had put in over the years. Although he was young, he was mature and good at taking care of people. That was why Mr. Tang trusted the young master to take care of Mississippi. The more Sister Lee looked at them, the more she felt that the young master and young miss were a match made in heaven, and her heart was filled with joy. Cher ate quickly and wiped her lips. "Sister Lee, I'm going to school." Sister Lee watched her leave and hurriedly called out, "Wait a minute, I haven't brought this bag yet." Cher was stunned. She watched as Sister Lee brought her bag over, took it, and got into the car. Sister Lee waved at her little cutie. Tears streamed down her face. She loved going to school. Uncle Zhao told some jokes along the way to make the little girl happy. Everyone in Pei Garden liked Cher and liked to make her happy. It could be said that the world that Shuer grew up in was a clean and kind world. Therefore, Yi Muyun did not want her to get involved with the secular world. However, people would grow up eventually, and she would have her own thoughts. The car stopped at the entrance of B University. Old Zhao opened the door for her and carried her bag far away before leaving. However, Cher watched as he left, and his car drove away. She did not continue walking into the school. Instead, she walked out of the school with her bag and hailed a taxi. She dialed Zhou Chongwang's number. She was not stupid. She could remember these numbers after seeing them once. Chapter 2045. There was an indescribable unfamiliarity in his voice, and it carried too much weight. Cher knew in her heart that Rongwang's storm started because of him and her. She pursed her lips and said faintly, "I want to see Gu Mei. Do you have a way?" Zhou Chongwang was silent for a long time before replying, "Okay." Cher arranged a time and place with him and instructed the driver to drive over. She knew in her heart that her brother would know what she was doing, but she couldn't care less now. He was purposely avoiding her, and she could feel it. When it came to Rongwang and Gu Mei, she and Yi Muyun were on opposite sides. She wasn't afraid that they would fight because of this. If it was because of this, it meant that their relationship wasn't unbreakable. The taxi stopped at the entrance of the #1 detention center in B City. Cher got off and stood there waiting. About half an hour later, Zhou Chengwang appeared. He drove there himself, a Land Rover Aurora. The car was parked at the entrance of the detention center in a hurry. When she opened the car door and got off, Cher realized that he had lost a lot of weight. Zhou Chengwang closed the car door very slowly. He stared at Gu Mei for a long time before saying faintly, "Go in. I've already said hello, but can't be too long." Cher looked at him and said softly, "Zhou Chengwang, I want to see her alone." Zhou Chengwang didn't have much expression on his face. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it up skillfully. After taking a puff, he said, "No problem." Cher stopped in her tracks and asked him softly, "Zhou Chengwang, Gu Mei's liking doesn't mean anything to you?" Zhou Chengwang held the cigarette between his slender fingers as he leaned against the elevator wall and looked at her. At this moment, his expression was completely like that of a businessman, completely different from the white moonlight that Gu Mei had seen in the beginning. Cher thought to herself, if Gu Mei saw Zhou Chengwang now, would she still be like a moth to the flame? No matter what, she had seen Gu Mei, separated by glass. The two of them seemed to be in two different worlds. Cher held onto the phone and stared at Gu Mei. Gu Mei used to be a very beautiful girl, but after not seeing her for a few days, she looked more haggard, as if she had aged a few years. When she opened her mouth, Gu Mei's voice was a little hoarse and trembling. "Why are you here?" Cher looked at her and said slowly, "Gu Mei, if you have to choose between saving you and glory, which one will you choose?" Gu Mei's eyes widened. She looked at Shui, in disbelief. "I'm not doing this for anyone else, but for myself." Cher's tone was indifferent. "You must think that I'm living like a rice worm, right? Do you think that I'm useless without Yi Muyin? You won't be able to survive, right?" Gu Mei's fingers tightened around the phone. Every word of Cher seemed to be cutting her heart into pieces. She was the one who couldn't survive because of a man and had to bear the blame of the whole world. "Gu Mei, I just don't want to owe anyone, you or Zhou Chengwang." Cher's voice was firm. "You chose Zhou Chengwang and be well. Then I will help you, even if I have to use all my strength." Gu Mei was speechless. "Cher, Gu Mei, in the end, let's see if your choice is right." Cher suddenly burst into a smile, hung up the phone, and walked straight out. Chapter 2046. She didn't want her brother to treat her this way. He should have his own life, not for her. Gu Mei's love would make Zhou Chengwang feel guilty, but her brother's love would make her feel restrained. Gu Mei was stunned. She muttered to herself, "Cher, what are you trying to do? I'm crazy. Are you crazy too?" All of a sudden, she felt that the obedient Cher had disappeared. She didn't recognize the person in front of her. That little cutie had disappeared. Did Mr. Yi know about it? How would he feel if he knew that the little princess he had been protecting wasn't a silly girl? After all, Gu Mei used to be Bo Yi's woman, so she would think more. She would think about whether Shui would grow up in the future and whether she would fight with Chairman Yi for Bo Yi. However, she didn't know how many years she would be sentenced to. She might not be able to see it. When Cher walked out, Zhou Chengwang was still smoking at the door. When he saw her, he looked down. Done talking, Shui walked in front of him and stood there. She looked at Zhou Chengwang with a gaze that was even colder than his own. "Gu Mei has chosen to fulfill your wish. Congratulations, Zhou Chengwang. You've successfully made use of a girl's wishful thinking." Her clear eyes were no longer innocent. Instead, they had an expression that could see through everything. Under that gaze, Zhou Chengwang was almost embarrassed. After a moment, he said in a hoarse voice, "I didn't mean to use her. I know Gu Mei is silly." Cher pursed her lips. "But Zhou Chengwang, no matter how many years Gu Mei is sentenced to, if I find out that you've let her down, I could destroy your glory myself without Yi Muyun's help." She said those harsh words not because she was arrogant, but because Bo Yi was full of talents. There wasn't only one Gu Zhe. There were many Gu Zhes that could be used. Zhou Chengwang leaned against the wall. Suddenly, his gaze fell on her. In his eyes, there was a shadow of the past. After a long time, he said softly, "Are you only doing this for Gu Mei? What else?" Cher looked into the distance. Zhou Chengwang, we're the only ones here today, so I don't mind telling you that it's impossible for us to be together. Without Yi Muyun, it's impossible for us to be together. I help Rongwang because I don't want Gu Mei to be too sad. Also, don't fall in love so easily in the future. Being sincere will kill you. As she spoke, she slowly walked towards the elevator. Zhou Chengwang didn't chase after her. He just looked at her back and suddenly smiled. She was really different from what he had imagined. It turned out that the person he had always liked was just an illusion. This was her true appearance. Perhaps it was because she was under Yi Muyun's wings that she was so pure and peaceful. It was his fault. He had forgotten that her surname was Tang and she was Tang Yu's child. How silly could she be? And a man like Yi Muyun, would he like a little silly? Or perhaps Yi Muyun liked to be silly all the time and she was just like that, until he angered her. Only then did she explode and reveal her true self. Zhou Chengwang laughed, but it was a pitiful laugh. He had also met Gu Mei. He didn't say much and only gave her a promise. That promise was for Gu Mei, but it was more accurate to say that it was for him who thought too highly of himself. Because he was the same as Gu Mei, he liked someone he shouldn't like. Chapter 2047. When Zhou Chengwang came out of the detention center, the sun was already shining brightly above him. He raised his hand to shield his eyes. He felt that it was dazzling, and his body didn't feel warm at all. He felt that in the future he might lose the ability to love, and he would never be able to love again, because loving once was enough. The price to pay for loving once was too great. On the same day, Zhou Chengwang's father suddenly passed away because of a heart attack. To the 20-year-old Zhou Chengwang, this was a huge blow. In a single night, he had to bring glory and his entire family to the fore. But Bo Yi's suppression did not stop at all. It was like Mount Tai was pressing down on him. The Zhou family's funeral was done hastily, and there was almost no time to do anything. And the whole process only took a short 2 days. In Bo Yi's office, Yi Muyun sat on the sofa, and Gu Zhe sat opposite him. Yi Muyun reached out and flipped through the documents in his hand. He asked calmly, "Are you done with the Zhou family's matter?" Gu Zhe's expression was complicated. He paused for a moment before nodding. "Yes, it's done. I need to get glory within a week." At this time, Zhou Chengwang's will is at its weakest. Yi Muyun closed the document. His voice was emotionless. "Also, the shareholders' voting meeting will be held next Monday. It's just a formality. There's no need to be too extravagant. You understand." Gu Zhe understood that it was all because Mr. Yi didn't want Cher to know. Everything had to be handled in a low-key manner. But he still asked worriedly, "Mr. Yi, the Zhou family just got into trouble. If we do this, won't it be too inhumane?" Yi Muyun put his fingers on his knees and glanced at Gu Zhe. "Acquisition has always been an inhumane thing. Gu Zhe, when did you become so soft-hearted?" One had to know that Gu Zhe had even lost his own sister, so why would he care about the Zhou family's feelings? However, Yi Muyun could immediately guess that Gu Zhe was worried about Cher. However, the more worried he was, the angrier he got. His voice was a little cold. "If you're worried about Cher, you don't have to. I won't let her know." Gu Zhe wanted to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. 2 days ago, Mr. Yi found out that Cher went to the detention center. He didn't say anything, nor was he angry. He just put Cher under house arrest in Pei Garden. Gu Zhe didn't know what was going on between them, but he was worried. Cher seemed to be really going against him this time, especially now that the Zhou family was in trouble. If she found out about the forceful acquisition, who knew what would happen? In a week's time, it would be her birthday, and they would get engaged. Gu Zhe's feelings were very complicated. He wanted to see Gu Mei. Gu Mei didn't say anything, but from the determined expression on her face, he could tell that she was hiding a secret in her heart, and this secret was related to Rongwang. Out of some selfishness, he probably couldn't bear to see her go to jail, so he helped her. He didn't tell Mr. Yi about this. He didn't say it, but it didn't mean that Mr. Yi didn't know. But he said that he, as an older brother, let down his sister, even though she was silly and he had let her down long ago. Pei Garden. Yi Muyun's car stopped on the lawn. When he opened the door and got out, Sisterly came over, looking worried. "Young master, Miss didn't eat anything today. It's been 2 days. Even if she's made of iron, she won't be able to take it. Chapter 2048. Sisterly did not dare to say this to young master. She only said carefully, "Why don't you let Miss go out for a walk? Who knows, she might be able to eat when she's in a good mood." Yun looked at Sister Lee without any expression. Sister Lee's heart skipped a beat. This young Master Mu Yun was young and not a member of the Tang family. However, he had that kind of prestige that made everyone in the family respect him and not dare to look down on him. Just by looking at him now, Sisterly did not dare to act rashly again. Instead, Yun said calmly, "What is there to eat in the kitchen now? I will bring it up." Sister Lee's heart relaxed as she said, "That's for the best. Miss listens to young master the most." She turned around and prepared a tray with soup, 2 plates of vegetables, and a small bowl of rice. They were all Miss's favorite food. Young master would feed her later, and it would be back soon. Yun put down the briefcase and unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of his shirt before walking upstairs slowly. Upstairs, Cher was throwing a tantrum. Everything that could be smashed in his bedroom had been smashed. Some of them were even masterpieces that he had painstakingly collected. Yun stood at the door and looked at the mess in the room. The culprit was curled up at the head of the bed, sulking. "You're angry with me? You don't have a grudge with these things, right?" Yun laughed and walked around the broken pieces. He placed the food on the bedside table and looked down at her. She was probably furious. She did not wash her face and laid there in her pajamas. She did not even lift her eyelids when he came back. "Eat something." He sat at the head of the bed and wanted to carry her with one hand. However, Cher avoided him. Her little face was a little pale, and her voice was a little hoarse. "Do you think that I won't know what happened outside just because you locked me here?" Yun's gaze was indifferent as he looked at her. After a long time, he said, "It seems that you know everything." "Yes, I know. I know that Zhou Chengwang's father passed away. At a time like this, why do you still want to forcefully buy it?" She shook her head. "I don't understand why you do this. Just because he went to see me once, even without my knowledge." Yun put down the bowl in his hand, and his expression became even more indifferent. "Cher, it's the law of the jungle in the business world. I can only say that I'm sorry. To me or to Zhou Chengwang." Cher pursed her lips. "Gumei is in jail. I heard that she will be sentenced to 3 years. Zhou Chengwang's father is dead. Don't tell me it has nothing to do with the acquisition. So, what's your conclusion?" Yun's lips curled into a cold smile. "Use the 20% you have to veto, huh?" Cher's heart was beating wildly. She stared at him for a long time before gritting her teeth. "So you're locking me up like this? Am I right? When you grow up, you will know how important Rongwang's acquisition is to the development of Boyi. I didn't do it for personal reasons, but I don't deny that it started out because of anger." He was straightforward. Cher's eyes were wide open. She looked at him as if she didn't know him. She knew that he was very capable and had put in a lot of effort to climb to the position of vice president at the age of 20. But she had always thought that he was at most 25 years old. But now she found that his cruelty was far beyond what she had imagined. He could talk about the Zhou family's misfortune as if it had nothing to do with him. Chapter 2049. She looked at him as if she didn't know him. She looked at him carefully, trying to find a trace of familiarity, but there was nothing. She looked at him as if she was looking at a cold-blooded businessman. After a while, Cher said, "What if I don't use the 20% veto? What if I use myself to exchange for it?" The next second, he pinched her chin. His face was full of anger. "Take back what you said." He understood what she meant. If he didn't revoke the acquisition of glory, he would lose her. "I won't." She boldly went against him, her voice calm and cold. "You can choose to let gain glory, but I can also choose to let you lose everything you have now." Yun stared at her little face. His gaze was deep, but his voice was calm. "Do you know what you mean?" It meant that all his hard work had been trampled by her. It meant that their relationship had never been equal. It meant that everything he had done for her had been in vain. Yun looked at her and smiled. "Do you really want to do this?" She didn't say anything. He continued, "Whether it's from Bo Yi's point of view or my own, the acquisition has become a reality. Cher, you make your own choice." He got up and put the food on the bedside table. His tone was calm. Perhaps you've grown up and have your own ideas. As he said these words, he remained calm. She could feel that he was angry, but she didn't get angry because she said that she would make all his hard work go to waste. She had actually hurt him. He got up slowly and walked towards the door. Cher's heart skipped a beat. She looked at him, and her voice was a little panicked. "Brother." He stood at the door and slowly turned to look at her. After looking at her for a long time, he asked softly, "All these years, have you only treated me as your brother?" Cher shook her head. "No." He smiled faintly and said softly, "I won't lock you up. You're right. You have 20%, so you have the right to veto everything." In the end, she had used this method to veto everything he had. Yi Muyun's heart was somewhat desolate. His voice became even softer. "I'm willing to give you everything, including freedom." From the moment she said that, he knew that they could no longer be as simple as before. She was not only his sister, but also his boss. As Yi Muyun slowly walked out, countless thoughts flashed through his mind. 1,000 of them were all her. Cher suddenly got off the bed and hugged him from behind. She buried her face in his back and murmured, "Brother, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" His voice was slightly mocking. "What did you do to me?" "You just did what you wanted to do." Cher hugged him, but she did not feel the slightest bit of warmth. However, she did not want to let go. She did not want to let go. "Brother, can I apologize to you?" Her voice was very soft. "I was talking nonsense." She said a lot, but he just calmly asked her, "Have you changed your mind?" She was stunned. "Cher, if I said that your vote would make it difficult for me to move forward in Boise, would you still vote for me?" He asked her softly. She did not speak, and her breathing was also soft and shallow. Chapter 2050. After a long time, she said in a low voice, "No, you still have me. Do you think I relied on women to stand firm in Boise?" His voice suddenly deepened. He gently broke free from her and walked out. Cher looked at her empty hand in a daze. Was he really angry? Was her choice wrong? She stood there in a daze for a long time before turning back to look at the tray. She picked it up, sat on the sofa, and finished it. She brought the tray downstairs to show him. She was obedient, but there was no one downstairs. Sister Lee said that young master had gone out. Cher was a little disappointed, so she sat on the first floor and waited for him to come back. But he still hadn't come back by 10 at night. Cher couldn't help falling asleep. When she woke up, the night was already cold. She sat up and looked at the blanket covering her. She couldn't help looking around and called out unconsciously, "Brother, hurry up and go to sleep." Sister Lee appeared out of nowhere and said gently, "Young master isn't back yet." Cher pursed her lips and looked at Sister Lee. He didn't call back? Sister Lee was speechless. She didn't know what to say. She knew that the two of them were at odds, but she didn't know it would turn out like this. "Miss Sister Lee, please don't say anything. No matter what, young master is the one who will walk with you to the end. Other people aren't that important," Sister Lee said earnestly. Snow hugged her knees and grunted softly in acknowledgement. She slowly went upstairs and hesitated for a moment before going to his bedroom. The bedroom that she had smashed had been cleaned up and looked exactly the same as before. But when she walked in, she only felt that it was cold and empty. Gently lying on the bed, she sniffed the pillow that had a scent on it. She stayed up a little longer and finally fell asleep. When the sun shone into the bedroom, she woke up with a start. She looked around, but it was still quiet. He wasn't back. Cher had an indescribable feeling in her heart. She pursed her lips and felt her body drenched in sweat. Only then did she remember that she had a nightmare last night. After a moment of hesitation, he walked into the bathroom, took off his clothes, and took a shower. Less than a minute later, the bathroom door was pulled open. Cher was startled. Yi Muyun was standing at the door. Her voice murmured, "Brother." Yi Muyun's gaze quietly fell on her body, so deep that she couldn't understand it. But he didn't hug and kiss her like he usually did. He just glanced at her and said, "I'm going to the other bathroom." Cher was a little surprised. Before he left, she hugged him and stammered, "Actually, you don't have to. Is this considered throwing yourself into my arms?" He looked down at her, without much expression on his face. She hesitated for a long time before whispering, If I say yes, do you want it? You can't please a man with your body. He gently pushed her away and walked outside. Cher was embarrassed. Such a situation had never happened before. Did he not want her anymore? When she asked this, he paused and slowly turned to look at her. Do you think so? Her heartbeat quickened, and she kept looking at him. I thought you wouldn't care so much. He laughed at himself and turned to walk out. Cher looked at his back. She couldn't chase after him naked, so she could only watch him leave. Chapter 2051. When she came out of the shower, he had already showered elsewhere and was putting on his clothes. He looked handsome and charming in a formal three-piece suit. She walked up to him and asked softly, "Where did you go last night?" "I went to the bar." He lowered his head slightly. "What else do you want to ask? Do you want to ask if I had an affair or if I was with someone else?" "I didn't." She denied it. Yi Muyun smiled. "If I was with someone else, would you not want me anymore?" "Yes." This time, her answer was firm. He looked at her for a long time before his lips curled into a smile that seemed to be happy and mocking at the same time. She couldn't tell, so she shamelessly followed behind him and whispered, "Have you thought about it?" Yi Muyun walked to the stairs and stopped. "There's still 3 days. Let's calm down." She only needed to think about her choice, but he had to let her choose and clean up after her mess. He didn't know why he was so indulgent. He only knew that after she had helped Zhou Chongwang like this and hurt him like this, he still didn't want to let go. After so many years, how could he let go of her just because he wanted to? Yi Muyun got into the car and started it. After a while, Guze called. His tone was indifferent. "Don't stop the acquisition. I want to make Rongguang's situation as bad as possible in these 3 days." By then, even if Cher signed the document, Rongguang would have no way out. If Zhou Chongwang was a smart manager, he would choose to cooperate with Bo Yi. By then, it would be up to Yi Muyun to decide whether things would be good or bad. Although it was a little troublesome, he didn't mind putting in more effort for the sake of his little girl. On the other side, Guze nodded and immediately got to work. In Pei Garden, Cher began to see Yi Muyun less and less. She still slept in his bedroom, but he always came back at dawn, and when he came back, he was drunk. Moreover, he had stopped kissing her and hugging her. She began to panic. Did he not want her anymore? Finally, the day before signing the documents, Yi Muyun came back very early. Cher was still awake. She was curled up on the sofa, her pointy little face buried in her knees. When she saw him come back, her eyes lit up and she stared at him. "How have you been thinking these past few days?" Yi Muyun took off his jacket and slowly squatted down. He reached out to brush away the messy hair on her face and looked at her tenderly. At that moment, his gentleness made her think that the quarrel a few days ago was just an illusion. In fact, they had always been fine, and she had just had a dream. She sat up, her heart pounding as she looked at him. "You went home? This is my home. Why wouldn't I come back?" He reached out to pinch her little face. "If you still don't want to talk about it, I'll go take a shower first." With that said, he was about to get up, but Cher's sharp nose picked up the scent of perfume from his body. She was stunned. He had gone to the bar again tonight, and then he had a woman's scent on him. What had he done? She grabbed him with her fingertips and didn't let go. "What's wrong?" he asked her good-naturedly. Shue lifted her eyes and looked at him. "You went to the bar again." He didn't deny it. He smiled and said, "Yes, I think freedom is relative. You can't expect me to work from 9 to 5 and report to you when you're free. Can you?" Chapter 2052. She was speechless for a long time before she asked, "What's the limit of your freedom? Does it include having other women?" When she asked, her breathing was light and painful. Her heart felt like it was being pressed by something. It was extremely uncomfortable. Yi Muyun looked at her and said calmly, "If you don't mind." "I mind," she said softly. He smiled and did not say anything. He pulled his tie and walked to the bathroom. Cher turned around and looked at his back. Then she followed him boldly. Just as she entered, his shirt was thrown at her, covering her little face with it. The faint smell of his perfume almost drove her crazy. She tore it off and was about to throw it into the trash can. But her hand paused because she saw a bright red lipstick mark on her neckline. A woman's lipstick mark. Was it left by a woman? What kind of situation did she leave the lipstick mark on? She was a little dazed and did not dare to question him. She could only hold the shirt and stare at it, sulking. About a minute later, she threw the shirt into the trash can and walked out, closing the door loudly. He must have heard it. Now, she did not want to talk to him anymore. Yi Mu-yoon was in the bathroom. When he heard the noise outside, he smiled. She would probably sign against it tomorrow. A lipstick mark was enough to strengthen her resolve. The alcohol in the bar was not for nothing. But that lipstick mark, Guze's lips were quite small. He did not notice it before. He was quite happy that she was angry now. His anger had not dissipated yet, so it was best that she was angry. They could be angry together, he thought childishly, and he made such a decision after careful consideration. He knew her well enough to know that if she signed such a contract, she would feel guilty towards him. Yes, he was still scheming against her. In love, scheming didn't mean that he did not love her, but that he loved her too much. So, he had to scheme against her again and again to keep her by his side. However, Yi Mi-yoon had schemed against himself and Cher, but not Zhou Chengwang. That was really a good seedling to play with conspiracies and schemes. Later, when he walked out, Cher was no longer in his bedroom. He looked around, smiled, put on his bathrobe, and walked out. He stood in front of her room and knocked on the door. Cher. There was no sound inside. After a while, he heard a shattering sound. She must have lost her temper again and smashed something. What a childish temper. She clearly saw it, but she didn't dare to tell him that she was sulking. Yi Mu-yoon smiled faintly and cleared her throat. Are you angry? Nothing happened. Pervert. She sounded like she was about to cry. You've already kissed me, but you haven't done anything yet. Yi Mi-yoon didn't say anything more. He went downstairs and called his sister Lee to comfort her. On the one hand, he wanted to make sure she didn't hurt herself. Sister Lee looked at her young master's eyes, which seemed to have turned gloomy. She was quite happy in her heart. He took the key and went in to comfort her for a long time. However, when he came out, he looked at Yi Mu-yoon with a complicated expression. Young master, you're not even married yet, but you're already drinking with women. Miss is very sad. If you do this again in the future, I'm afraid she won't forgive you. Chapter 2053. Sister Lee gave him another reproachful look before she slowly walked downstairs to give the couple some space. Yi Mi-yoon stood at the door of her room for a while and heard the sound of crying. His heart ached, but he didn't go in. He kept listening with a slight smile on his face. It was as if her crying was something that made him happy. Until late at night, she stopped crying. She probably fell asleep. No matter how long she cried, he would stay by her side. It was almost dawn when he finally left. Cher woke up at dawn with her eyes swollen. When she got up, she threw a tantrum again and wanted to smash the room. Of course, she went to his bedroom and smashed it again. Anyway, she smashed whatever he liked. It was 9 o'clock before she changed into a dark blue dress and went to Boy in old Zhao's car. She walked along the corridor of the meeting room, her heart pounding. She knew what it meant, but she was still willing to do it. She had been hesitant at first, but what happened last night made her hesitation go to hell. She knew that she had let her emotions get the better of her. She signed this document because of Yi Mu-yoon and not because of Zhou Chengwang or Gume. The billions of yuan was the result of their anger. Guze was already waiting at the door. When he saw her coming, he took the initiative to ask again, "Have you thought it through? After all, this concerns Mr. Ye's position in Boy. The CEO wanted to promote Mr. Yi to the position of CEO after we acquire Glory. You know what I mean." Cher pursed her lips. "There's no need to think about it. I've already decided." With that, she walked straight into the meeting room. In the end, such a big acquisition was ended because of her opposition. The executives of Boy were shocked and in an uproar. But most of them were not against Yi Mu-yoon, but against Cher. She was the only descendant of the Tang family, and it was obvious that her behavior today had angered the shareholders. She was obviously not a good leader. Such behavior had doomed her to never become the CEO of Boy, although most people knew that the future CEO would be Mr. Yi. However, Cher's actions still deeply hurt the shareholders' hearts. In contrast, Yi Mu-yun was much calmer. He looked at her lightly. Are you sure? Cher nodded. Yes, I'm sure. After she finished signing, she didn't want to look at him, so she threw the pen away and left. Yi Mu-yun still had things to deal with, so he gave Guze a look and asked him to stop Cher at the door. Guze understood tacitly and restrained the man. The door of the meeting room was closed again. Without Cher knowing, Yi Mu-yun had used his own methods to appease the shareholders, guaranteeing that glory light would be acquired. Only then did the matter settle down. However, everyone in Bo, he also looked down on Yi Mu-yun. That was too much pampering, really too much. They even treated the company's matters as a joke, which made Bo Schwer happy. In this regard, Mr. Yi would have a headache. She was going to be engaged. If he didn't spoil her more, what if she ran away? After the meeting, it was already past lunchtime. When he returned to the office, Cher was still there. The lunch on the table was untouched. She was curled up on the sofa, as if she was sulking. Are you not angry now? He walked over and half squatted in front of her. Glory light has been saved. Are you not happy? Chapter 2054. Schwer glared at him and snorted softly. You know it. He laughed and sat on the back of the sofa beside her. He reached out and rubbed her fluffy little head. Are you here today to sign or to denounce me? HM? She turned her head to the other side, obviously not wanting to talk to him. She even spat out 3 words. Shameless. Yi Mu-yun chuckled. Are you going to let me off just like that after what happened last night? She turned her head and glared at him angrily, feeling a little embarrassed. If it were me, if there was even the slightest trace of a man on your body, I guarantee that I would break that man's leg. Then I would tie you to my side and not allow you to go anywhere. He chuckled. She did not know why, but she could hear a hint of seduction in his tone. Cher was puzzled. Why was he happy instead of angry that she had signed something like that? She looked at him suspiciously. Did you do something to let me down last night? He played with her long hair and replied nonchalantly. Do you want to know how I spent last night? No. She covered her ears and stood up immediately. I want to go home. However, she had only taken 2 steps when he pulled her back and she sat in his arms. She was embarrassed and angry as she struggled with all her might. However, he did not intend to let go of her. He locked her in his arms and kissed her passionately. She threw a tantrum in his arms and did not let him kiss her. She especially did not let him have his way, but he always had a way to deal with her. In the end, she was folded in his arms and kissed deeply. As their lips and teeth intertwined, he murmured her name, making her heart warm up. Her head was dizzy. At that moment, she forgot about Zhou Chong-wang and the matter of him drinking with prostitutes. It was as though they had returned to the past, where there was only the 2 of them. After kissing for a long time, he forced himself to leave her mouth and pressed his forehead against hers. Last night, Guze drank too much and smeared a woman's lipstick on my collar. Cher's eyes widened. She refused to believe that such a thing could be done. But then, Mr. Yi took out a piece of paper. There were a few identical lip marks on it, just like the ones on his shirt last night. Cher stared at them for a long time before softly saying, You guys are really perverts. Even being with a woman was better than being with Guze. Did she think that not only would she have to snatch him from a woman, she would also have to snatch him from a man? He understood the meaning of her words and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He reached out and knocked on her forehead. What are you thinking? I did it on purpose. I'm not a pervert like you think. She knew better than anyone that he was straight, but if she didn't believe it, he could make her believe it now. Sensing the green light in his eyes, Cher reached out and stopped him. She said in a low voice, Don't. They were still in the office, and he would have scruples about what he wanted to do. In the end, he stopped and held her in his arms. He sighed softly. You're not angry anymore. Can we eat now? He rubbed his tummy. I'm really hungry now. Cher pouted. You deserve it. She hadn't expected that he would back down on the matter of glory. She thought that he would be angry, but in the end, he wasn't. Also, she believed him when he said that he was Guze, because she was willing to believe him. Chapter 2055. Yi Mu-yun was indeed hungry. After feeding her a little, he gobbled up the rest. After a few days of torment, Not only was she tired, but he was also quite tired. At least, he had not had a good sleep for many days. Hence, he hugged the little girl and went to the lounge to lie down together. Perhaps it was because they had reconciled, or perhaps it was because they had let go of everything. Cher became softer and even took the initiative to lean into his arms, kiss his chin, and call him brother. "You're not angry anymore?" He looked at her deeply, his fingers gently caressing her red lips. Cher hugged his waist a little shamelessly and only hummed softly. Immerse originally only wanted to hug her and sleep for a while, but the little girl was humming and moaning at this moment. He felt a sense of naughtiness in his heart. He turned sideways and looked at her. His voice was low and husky, with a hint of coaxing. "I'm going to be busy for many days after this. Shouldn't you compensate me?" His gaze was too passionate, and her heart skipped a beat. Somehow, she knew what he wanted to do. She lowered her gaze and did not say a word. Her little face was completely red. His thin lips pressed against her ear, and he said a few words in a low voice. The little girl's face turned even redder. Then he grabbed her little hand and brought her to him. She was nervous throughout the whole process, and he was even more confused than she was. She looked up and saw a faint blush in her eyes. She had never seen him in such a messed up state before. In the end, she was pressed into his arms and could hear his heart beating like thunder. His voice was low and husky, and there was a hint of secrecy in it. She did not dare to look or listen. She could only bury herself in his arms and tremble lightly. In the heat of passion, he raised his hand to take a tissue to wipe her hands. He said slowly, "Let's go to my parents' house tonight." Cher was a little nervous. She could not care less about her shyness and looked up at him. "Are we really going? An ugly daughter-in-law has to meet her in-laws eventually." He chuckled and reached out to pinch her little face, causing her to cry out, "You haven't washed your hands yet." He was still smiling as he whispered in her ear, "There are still people who use." The last few words were said in a low and husky voice, deliberately teasing her. Hearing this, the little girl raised her fist to greet him. He was so bad. "Maybe you'll like this in the future and beg me." He smiled, hugged her with one arm, and called Chin Anlin with the other. After talking for about 2 minutes, he hung up. After that, the man would always be slightly tired after indulging himself. In addition, they had a Cold War before, so he wanted to have a good sleep. He hugged the little girl a little tightly, as if he was hugging a small toy in his arms. Cher pursed her lips and complained, "Be gentler." He chuckled and patted her, but, "With me, there's no such thing as a light punishment." Her voice was as sweet as honey. "It hurts." He smiled and pressed her into his arms. He called her name softly and said, "Be good." Snow lay in his arms, feeling uneasy. "If I don't behave, will you stop liking me? Are you going to find another woman outside?" "That's right. You're not going to like me anymore." He glanced at her and replied, "Probably. So there will only be one time." She replied with an "oh," and buried herself in his arms. She was also a little tired. Slowly, she fell asleep in his arms. Chapter 2056. He listened and couldn't help laughing. He was a sleepy person, but now he couldn't fall asleep. Instead, he hugged her and coaxed her to sleep. After she fell asleep, Yumian looked at her for a long time before gently pulling her little hands and feet away. Then, he quietly walked out of the lounge. Guze was waiting for him in the office. Seeing Yimuyun come out, Guze said calmly, "The acquisition of Glory Light has been stopped. Although some people in the company have some complaints, it has been settled." Yimuyun nodded. "Pressure Glory Light openly and secretly. I don't want to see them last until the end of the year. In addition, merge Glory Light into my private company." Guze nodded, but still hesitated. What if Sharon knows Mr. Ye's plan? She won't know. After the engagement, I will send her to New York to study. My focus will also be in New York, Yimuyun said calmly. Of course, when she finished her studies and returned to the country, there would be no more people like Zhou Chongguang in B City. He would no longer be a threat to her. Guze nodded. Mr. Ye's arrangement is perfect. Some things are not suitable for young girls. Yimuyun looked at him and said calmly, "What about Gume?" Are you really going to let her follow Zhou Chongwang in the future? Guze narrowed his eyes. When she comes out, I will send her abroad. He wouldn't allow his sister to follow someone who didn't love her. Yimyun didn't say anything more and opened the document. And neither he nor Guze noticed that the door of the lounge was opened a little, and a little person was standing behind the door, listening to their shocking words. Cher was a little stunned. It turned out that he didn't intend to let Zhou Chongwang go, but to deal with her. In private, he was still suppressing Rongguang. In the near future, Rongguang would still be acquired, but not by Boyi, but by Yi Muyun's own company. The blood in her entire body froze as she stared at that handsome figure in disbelief. Only now did she realize how naive she had been. He was so powerful that he was terrifyingly evil. Yes, he was extremely scary. She couldn't even touch his deep soul. The big brother, who always hugged her and called her baby, was just an illusion. Because of her, he didn't go home for a few days and purposely left lipstick marks on his white shirt. In order to appease her, he gave up his glory, but the truth was so unbearable. Cher stood there for a long time, so long that she felt dizzy. Was he the brother that she liked? At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Yi Muyun finished his work and opened the door to the lounge. Cher was still lying on the bed with a blanket covering her face. Piggy. He sat by the bed and reached out to pinch her little nose. Cher grunted in acknowledgement and opened her eyes. Her face was naturally flushed from sleep, and she called out, "Big brother, get up, I'll take you home." Yi Muyun pinched her little nose, dragged her up, and held her in his arms. He tidied her hair bit by bit and kissed her little nose. "Our little yellow bun smells so good." "I'm not a little yellow bun." She snorted. "If you want to eat yellow bun, I'll buy you 2 baskets. Then they're called soup dumplings." He chuckled, and his gaze fell somewhere. She was a little embarrassed. Shameless. Chapter 2057. The mirror in the elevator gave him a wicked idea. He pushed her to the side and kissed her fiercely. She could see how he kissed her shamelessly if she opened her eyes. The elevator opened and closed, but they couldn't get out of the elevator. When they finally reached the outdoor parking lot, the sky was already dark. She got into the car and hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you want to bring a gift?" Yi Muyun got into the car and buckled his seatbelt. He put his hands on the steering wheel and smiled at her. "That's what men do." Cher replied softly, "It's my first time." "Young lady, you still want your first time." He suddenly leaned over and whispered into her ear. She blushed, and he couldn't help but caress her cheeks. "I'm going to take it away on the night of the engagement." She blushed even more and looked away. When he couldn't see her, her face turned pale again. The car drove into the driveway, and they arrived at the Qin residence after an hour. There were many children in the Qin family. The 2 younger ones went to boarding school. This was an inhumane request from Qin Anlin, the wife-doting maniac. As for Qin Mo and Qin Mu, they still lived together. When Yi Muyun arrived home, the twins had yet to return from their supplementary lessons at school. It wasn't the first time he brought Cher home. It was just that he had never done it so solemnly. He said he didn't need a gift, but he did bring one. He bought it himself. He gave Qin Anlin a piece of suet jade that he could play with in his hands. As for Yi Liangxiu, it was a black pearl the size of a man's thumb. Cher felt that she could kick it like a ball. The Qin family was naturally very welcoming of this young guest. The servants prepared a table of dishes and waited for the banquet to start. Yi Liangxiu held Cher's hand and went upstairs. She picked out a lot of jewelry that was suitable for a young girl from her collection. When Cher came downstairs, she felt that her hands and neck were about to break. She stood there clean and fair with all kinds of jewelry hanging on her body. They looked colorful but indescribably cute. Yi Muyun smiled faintly and shifted his gaze to his mother. He secretly sighed in his heart. His mother also spoiled Cher like a little daughter. How was she like a daughter-in-law? However, it was the best thing for a man that they could get along so well. Cher was still young, so Yi Liangxiu felt really guilty towards Tang Yu and Pei Chi. Cher would only be 18 in a few days, and her son was already a beast. She felt that she shouldn't think too much about it. The more she thought about it, the more ashamed she was. However, Her son was calm, as if nothing had happened. He still married his wife, and his heartbeat did not increase at all. After sitting for about half an hour, Qin Mo and Qin Mu came back. They were 14 years old and had grown up very well. Qin Mo had been a smiling tiger since he was a child. The adults in his family all said that he could deceive people with a smile and help him count money. Mu, on the other hand, was much quieter and had a cold temperament, a bit like Yi Liangxiu. When the two children saw Yi Muyun coming back, they both rushed over and affectionately called him brother. Cher was used to calling him brother, so she was not used to hearing them call him brother. Yi Muyun suddenly came over and said in a low voice, "After we get married, you're the only one allowed to call me brother, huh?" Chapter 2058. She didn't say anything, so he smiled in a low voice, took her little hand, and got up. "Okay, let's eat." He was like the head of the family. After that, the two little ones followed him, which made Cher a little speechless. She turned her head and saw Qin Mu's slim and graceful appearance. Qin Mu was not like her. At the age of 14, she was still a little bean sprout. Because of Yi Liangxiu's genes, Qin Mu was very tall. At the age of 14, she had grown to nearly 170, like a big girl. Cher was only in her early 160s. Looking at little Mu, she couldn't help sticking out her tongue and making a face. Qin Mu smiled faintly. His demure appearance was extremely similar to Yi Liangxiu's. Thus, among all the children, the one Qin Amlin doted on the most was Mu. Yi Muyun could more or less guess the dark thoughts within these few days. He also felt a little emotional in his heart. These years, when he lived apart from his parents, his father was also indifferent to him. It was not because he was estranged, but because he was becoming more and more like his father. He thought silently in his heart, "Fortunately, my father is not so narcissistic. If he appreciates me very much, it will be a little awkward." While thinking about it, he had already taken the little girl to the dining room. He solemnly pressed her to the seat on his right, which was the position of the daughter-in-law of the Qin family. Cher was also born in a big family. How could she not see it? She just hesitated for a moment and sat down. The two little ones sat opposite them with a secret smile, while Qin Amlin and Yi Liangxiu sat on both sides. The sumptuous dishes were served one after another, and Shui'er discovered that they were all dishes that she liked to eat, but her big brother was usually in control of them. She tilted her head and smiled sweetly at Yi Liangxiu. "Thank you, Aunt Liang. Thank you for your brother. Every time he comes back to eat, he will tell you what you like, what you don't like, what you like to eat, and what you can't eat often. So today I want to make you happy since I'm so happy." When she said this, Mr. Yi couldn't help but blush. He looked at his mother and said, "Mom, you can't spoil her like this." As he spoke, he reached out and pinched Cher's little face, his voice full of threat. "You know how much you should eat, okay? Otherwise, I'll have to call the doctor when I get a stomachache." Before Cher could say anything, Yi Liangxiu began to reprimand her son. "Mu Yun, you're too strict. Cher is an adult now. She knows her limits." She picked up some seafood with her chopsticks and gave it to Cher with a smile. Our Cher won't eat anything. Cher looked at the respectful Aunt Liang, and her heart was clear. If her brother's attitude was rough, then Aunt Liang was the shrewd one. Although she had prepared a table full of dishes for her to eat, her attitude was still there. She could eat as much as she wanted. So the little girl leaned against Yi Muyun, leaning against him, and looked here and there from time to time. Yi Muyun would frown first and then glare at her, but in the end, he would still force her to eat. Yi Liangxiu looked at her son with a smile. In fact, the person who spoiled her was her son. Facing his mother's gaze, Yi Muyun looked a little embarrassed and avoided it. But the two little ones kept smiling, and he couldn't do anything to them. Chapter 2059. Watching the two girls go upstairs one after another, Yi Liangxiu smiled and said, "If Cher doesn't grow up, she won't look like my granddaughter in the future." "You're belittling yourself, Mrs. Qin." Qin Amlin flipped through the newspaper and smiled faintly. "Mrs. Qin, you look very young, in your early 30s at most. How can you be a grandmother?" Yi Liangxiu glanced at him and pulled Yi Muyun to the tea room to talk. The servant brought them 2 cups of fragrant tea and closed the door. There were only the mother and son in the small room, so there was nothing that couldn't be said. I heard that you haven't been getting along with Rongwang recently, but it seems that you canceled the acquisition of Rongwang today. What's going on? Yi Liangxiu was still in charge of King Entertainment and had a wide network of contacts. Things in the business world couldn't be hidden from her. Yi Mian took a sip of tea and smiled faintly. Mom, didn't you hear that Cher signed an objection agreement today, so the acquisition plan was aborted? Of course, Yi Liangxiu knew about it, but she was more worried because she knew her son's temper too well. If he wanted to do something, no one could stop him. Moreover, she had asked Guze last time, and he said that the young man named Zhou Chengwang liked Cher. This was probably the reason why her son was unhappy. Otherwise, why would he fight a battle that he wasn't confident of winning from the beginning? Yi Liangxiu was angry and amused at the same time. If it wasn't Rongwang, but another powerful company, Mu Yin wouldn't be able to put down his pride if he couldn't take it down. But now, what she was most worried about was Cher's objection was useless. Mu Yin was still doing things his own way. She said with concern, I saw that Cher was quite happy today. The matter with Rongwang shouldn't have affected your relationship. Mu Yin, quit while you're ahead. Nothing is more important than your relationship. After she said all this, Yi Mian simply held his cup and did not speak. Yi Liangxiu understood his true thoughts and worriedly said, Does your Uncle Tang know that you've been working on your own company these past few years? Yi Mian nodded. Yi Liangxiu thought for a moment and said, You want to take Rongwang for yourself, right? Yes. At this point, if I don't take Rongwang for myself, all my previous investments will be in vain. Yi Mian said frankly. This time, Yi Liangxiu was silent for a long time before he asked softly, Mu Yun, is this part of your plan? You calculated that Cher would object, so you just sat back and reaped the benefits, didn't you? Yi Mian thought for a moment and said, Let's put it this way. Uncle Tang has always been aware of Boyi's movements. He is very supportive of the acquisition of Rongwang. His opinion on how to deal with Rongwang is the same as mine. Of course, after the acquisition of Rongwang, I will transfer 20% of the company's shares to Cher. After he said that, Yi Liangxiu was a little stunned. After a while, she said softly, Cher isn't a child anymore. Isn't this too cruel for her? She had thought that the people around her would care about her feelings, but in the end, it was just a lie to make her happy. Yi Mian drank the last sip of tea in his cup and said calmly, The business world has always been cruel. She shouldn't have gotten involved. I was just looking for a reason to get her out. Chapter 2060. Yi Liangxiu wanted to say something, but she didn't have the chance. She sat in the same place and didn't move. She was thinking, was it right or wrong to agree to let Mu Yun go to the Tang family? Over the years, Mu Yun had lived a more difficult life than any other child. He had planned his life 10 years ahead of schedule. 10 years, he must have paid a great price. But now, except for Cher, who was a little bit of blood in his heart, he had become a cold-blooded businessman. Yi Liangxiu vaguely remembered that her son was only 20 years old. He should have been in love, but he had finished his career early and was ready to get married early. In Mumu's room, the 2 girls, who were 4 years apart, were like peers. They lay on the bed together and talked about their thoughts. Mumu and Cher didn't hang out often, but they hit it off. Probably because Cher was tight-lipped, Qin Mu would usually tell her about her thoughts. In Qin Mu's heart, she had already regarded Cher as her sister-in-law. The 14-year-old Qin Mu tilted her head and looked at the 18-year-old Cher with a hint of joy in her cold eyes. Cher, I have someone I like. Cher held the comic book and couldn't help laughing. How old are you? You already have someone you like? Qin Mu glanced at her and said, Let me tell you, when you were 4 years old, you were kissed by my brother, and it was the kind of kiss that forced you against the wall. At such a young age, Qin Mu already knew everything. She only dared to say it in front of Cher. You've met the wrong person. Snow spat out softly as she deflected the attack with ease. However, Qin Mu smiled and said, I can see that you like your brother. Ba ba ba. I don't like him. Cher stuck out her tongue and made a face at Qin Mu. Qin Mu still looked gentle and asked, Don't you think I'm good-looking? It wasn't that she was confident. Her brother's looks were unparalleled among the younger generation in B City. However, he was usually too cold, so girls didn't like him. No, it was that no girls dared to approach him. No one wanted to be frozen, right? Snow's mind raced for a moment, and then she smiled contentedly. But the person I saw was also good-looking. A faint smile appeared on Chin Mu's face. He can play the piano, sitting in the sun, quiet and beautiful. As Chin Mu spoke, her face glowed faintly, and her whole body lit up. Cher frowned. Where did you see it? Chin Mu blinked. It's a secret, but I can take you to see him. Cher was a little surprised. You're in love? Chin Mu reached out and pinched Cher's face. You got engaged at the age of 18, and you're talking to me about being in love? She looked at Cher with the same expression as Yi Mu-yoon. Cher was in a trance for a moment. After a long time, she shook her head. All right, I'll go with you. Chin Mu was always a young girl who had to find someone to share everything with. But this time, she found the wrong person. Cher chatted with her until 11 p.m. before returning to her room. Because they were about to get engaged, everyone in the Chin family was clear about Yi Mi-yoon's feelings, so they didn't deliberately sleep in separate rooms. The two of them slept together if they wanted to. After all, they had slept together since they were young. And Yulianchio really wasn't sure if Cher still had her virginity. Chapter 2061. Seeing her come in, Yi Mi-yoon reached out to her. Why did you talk for so long? Cher rolled into his arms, hugged his waist, buried her little face in his chest, and smelled his pleasant scent. I chatted with Mumu for a while longer. She buried her face and suddenly asked softly, Brother, do you object to puppy love? Yi Mi-yoon wasn't on guard at all. He reached out to stroke her long hair and smiled faintly. You've been with me since you were 10 years old. She propped up her body in his arms and bit her lip. I mean, what if it's Momo and Mumu? Yi Mi-yoon couldn't help laughing. Them? They can't be. How old are they? You just said that I've been with you since I was 10 years old. Cher bit his waist. Such an intimate action probably pleased him. He smiled and rubbed her little head. How can we be the same? At this moment, he felt very gentle as he said such words. He leaned over and kissed her again. His voice was low and somewhat seductive. Baby, do you want to not wait for the engagement? She understood what he meant in a moment. She buried her little face in his arms and bit him. Scoundrel. Then she hugged his waist and didn't let him act rashly. He was an adult man who often slept with her, so he naturally had needs in that aspect. At this moment, their relationship was intimate, and the little girl was so soft in his arms. In fact, he wanted to make an exception. Moreover, he was a man, and this was his childhood bedroom. It would be more satisfying to have her here. But what could he do? His little girl wasn't willing, so he had to endure it no matter how much he wanted to. It was mainly because she was too young, and he had some barriers in his heart. However, he didn't let her go. 5 minutes later, the little girl was lying on the bed. He had taken quite a bit of advantage of her, and in the end, she cried out for her big brother. Her cries made his heart go numb, and he felt that this was the most beautiful thing in the world. Cher was very tired of being tortured by him. Before falling asleep, she hesitated to say what she wanted to say again and again, but she still couldn't say it. When she woke up early in the morning, Yi Mi-yoon had already gotten up. She was lying on the bed alone, looking around at the empty surroundings. At this time, Chin Mu came out of nowhere and sat by Cher's bed. I'll take you out of the Yoon Nation to pick up the items for the engagement. I'll come to pick you up at night. Cher propped herself up, her eyes sparkling. What about you? Today is Saturday. Chin Mu blinked and said with a mischievous look, we can play for the whole day. Cher didn't have any friends, but she had a good relationship with Mumu, who was 4 years younger than her, so she readily agreed. Suddenly, Chin Mu bit his ear and said softly, I'll bring you somewhere in the afternoon, but you have to get rid of my mom first. Cher immediately understood and made an okay gesture. The two girls looked at each other and smiled. At this time, Cher was looking forward to it. After all, having a little secret was a very exciting thing for a girl. After breakfast, Yulianchio took Shui to pick out the Chin family's heirlooms. They were passed down to her by Madame Qin, and since Shui was the daughter-in-law of the Qin family, it was only right that they belonged to her. Chapter 2062. Yi Lianxiu sighed, picked out some for her, and put them in a jewelry box. Cher didn't care about this and just happily got into the car with Qin Mu. The two little girls leaned close and talked excitedly. The mother shook her head again. Cher was still a little girl. She really didn't know why her son was willing to do this. He looked about the same age as Mumu. Yi Lianxiu drove her own car and took her little daughter and wife to the largest shopping mall in City B. She personally picked out a pair of dragon and phoenix gold bracelets designed by a famous designer, which were as thick as an arm, for Cher. Qin Mu and Cher kept laughing, especially Cher, who didn't look like she was going to get engaged at all. Yi Lianxiu shook her head as she picked out the things. But as long as Mu Yun liked it, it didn't matter. What Yi Lianxiu bought were all simple and unadorned items. She probably hoped from the bottom of her heart that she could use these items to make her son's marriage happy and happy. She thought self-deprecatingly that Mu Yun was going to get engaged, so she was now directly an elder. After picking out the things, the two little ones only wanted to go out to eat dessert. Unlike Yi Mu Yun, Yi Lianxiu was still willing to give the children freedom. After thinking for a while, she agreed. Besides, she had to ask the driver to move these things to the car. After escaping from the adults, the two little ones were very happy. They went to the dessert shop and ate a week's worth of desserts. Finally, they touched their little bellies and left in satisfaction. It was lunchtime when they left the dessert shop. Cher followed Mumu and asked, "Where are we going?" Qin Mu turned around and smiled. "Don't you want to see it? I'll take you to see the top piano performance." Cher immediately understood and smiled. "So fast." "Oh, I'll tell your brother later." Qin Mu stuck out her tongue. "Don't tell my brother." Cher chuckled. "Will your brother think that all the men in the world are not worthy of you?" Mumu winked at her. You know, the two little ones entered the restaurant. Because Qin Mu was tall, no one suspected that she was only 14 years old. Coupled with her outstanding temperament, it was easy for her to get an excellent seat. Qin Mu ordered the dishes skillfully. Her fluent French made Cher feel ashamed. "That's all." Qin Mu closed the menu and smiled. "By the way, hasn't your pianist come today?" The waiter looked at the time. 10 more minutes. Many of the female customers in this restaurant came from Mr. Zhou. Mr. Zhou had been playing here for 3 years, but the youngest and most distinguished customer was the little girl in front of him. Qin Mu nodded. "Okay, thank you." After the waiter left, Cher looked at the empty piano and whispered, "Mumu, you look like a rich woman who is going to adopt a gigolo." There was a dreamy look in Qin Mu's eyes. "You don't know. He looks like the sunshine in winter." She paused for a moment. "I want to marry him in the future." Cher stammered. "Isn't it too soon?" Qin Mu looked at the figure at the door of the restaurant and smiled. "Cher, do you know that sometimes you can tell at a glance that the person is the one you are waiting for?" Cher followed her gaze and looked over. Then, all the blood in her body almost froze. It was Zhou Chengwang who came in. Chapter 2063. Qin Mu was fascinated. Shui Er's head was a little stiff as she looked at her. She asked seriously, "Qin Mu, your feelings for him are only one-sided, right?" Qin Mu had a dreamy look on her face. "No, we're together." "They're together." These 4 words boomed in Cher's ears like thunder. She suddenly held Qin Mu's hand tightly, and her voice was tense and trembling. "Is that what you mean?" Qin Mu nodded. "Yes." And I took the initiative. Cher's body suddenly fell against the back of the chair behind her. She could hardly believe that Qin Mu would be so bold. She was only 14 years old. And what was Zhou Chengwang's motive for accepting this relationship? Cher pursed her lips and closed her eyes slightly. "You can't be with him." Qin Mu, on the other hand, had a cheerful expression. "Why? How could Shui or tell Qin Mu about those hidden secrets and darkness?" At this time, she suffered the greatest shock in her life. Maybe she was wrong. She was wrong about Zhou Chengwang. She raised her eyes slightly and looked at the side of Zhou Chengwang's face. At this time, as if he had sensed it, He turned his head and looked at her. With just one glance, she knew that he had everything under control. He had deliberately approached Mumu, and his purpose was obvious. Cher's heart was complicated. She almost didn't dare to face Qin Mu, let alone Yi Muyun. She even thought that if she had bought Rongwang quickly, Zhou Chengwang might not have had the time and energy to seduce Qin Mu. It was she who gave Zhou Chengwang a chance to take a breather. At the critical moment, she always stands on the side of Yi family. But Zhou Chengwang is in a new period of mourning. What kind of mood does he have to seduce Qin Mu? Her heart was burning with anger, but she could only endure it. She could only watch as Zhou Chengwang finished playing a song and walked straight toward her. Zhou Chengwang. Qin Mu generously called his name. She held his arm and introduced him as Cher. This is my sister-in-law, Tang Cher. Looking at their intimate appearance, Cher was angry in her heart, but she didn't show it in front of her. She just said softly, Mumu likes to draw, play the piano, and arrange flowers. She doesn't know much about business, so she probably doesn't know that Mr. Zhou is the heir of glory, right? Cher, you know him? Qin Mu was surprised. Yes, he's an alumnus. Cher nodded. Zhou Chengwang is very famous in the school. Qin Mu was slightly surprised. Really? Zhou Chengwang remained calm. He held Qin Mu's hand and slowly sat down. It's a coincidence. Qin Mu had always been quiet, but at this time, her eyes were shining when she looked at Zhou Chengwang, as if there was a small universe in love. Snow closed her eyes. Her entire body felt weak and powerless. She suddenly stood up and squeezed out a smile. I'm going to the bathroom. Qin Mu didn't doubt it. Then come here quickly. The dishes will be served in a while. Cher forced a smile. When she left her seat and turned around, she took a deep breath. She felt that all the blood in her body had been sucked out. Walking to the bathroom, she kept washing her face with cold water to calm herself down. She couldn't panic. She couldn't be sure how far Qin Mu and Zhou Chengwang had gone. In the mirror, a tall figure suddenly appeared. It was Zhou Chengwang. Cher's eyes met his in the mirror. Chapter 2064. Cher didn't say anything, but just stared at him fiercely. On the day my father died, the day Glory Light was on the verge of bankruptcy, there was no expression on Zhou Chengwang's clean face. On that day, I had her. Zhou Chengwang, aren't you afraid of retribution? Mumu is innocent. Cher's voice was extremely hoarse. Zhou Chengwang smiled and said, What about me? What about my father and all the employees of Glory Light? What did they do wrong? Cher growled angrily. So you blame Mumu for all this? She's only 14 years old. No, I'll marry her. Zhou Chengwang slowly approached her, almost trapping her in front of him in the sink. She's very happy now. As long as this lie is never exposed, she will feel that she will be very happy as Zhou Chengwang's wife. His face was as clean as ever, but there seemed to be a pair of black wings growing out of his white shirt. Snow still found it hard to accept. The huge change had shaken her to the point that she was in a mess after a long time. She said coldly, Do you think you can marry Mumu just because you want to? Yes. Zhou Chengwang's lips were close to her ear. But you don't know that she has a history of depression at such a young age. If I tell her everything, she will say that I'm a liar and that I like her sister-in-law. How big a blow do you think it will be to her? He almost whispered the last sentence against her lips. Do you think she'll have a relapse? With a loud slap, Schwerer's palm landed on his handsome face. She did not hesitate in the slightest, nor did she conserve her strength. Cher was so angry that her whole body was trembling. Did you investigate her? Yes. Zhou Chengwang's voice was very soft. When I was cornered by Yi Muyun, I was thinking that using any means necessary was the only way to save Rongwang and myself. Unfortunately, my father couldn't see it. Cher closes her eyes. I can persuade him to give up his glory. Let Mumu go. No matter what price she had to pay, even if she had to give all her shares to Yi Muyun, she would get Mumu back at this time. She knew very well that what she wanted to get back was the relationship between her and Yi Muyun. She thought that she was still selfish and let Mumu down by making such a decision. Zhou Chengguang laughed softly and said mockingly, "Now I feel that there are too many benefits to being the son-in-law of the Qin family. For example, we will still be a family in the future." Snow was utterly disgusted by the sight. He threw out his final trump card. "Think about it. Every time you see me, every time you see Qin Mu, do you feel guilty? Do you feel like you've let her down? Because—" He spat out a few words. "The one I like is you." Cher slapped him again. "Zhou Chengguang, you're crazy." "Yes, I'm crazy, but Yi Muyun forced me to do all this." Zhou Chengguang smiled coldly. "No, I'll attend your engagement ceremony with Yi Muyun on time, sister-in-law." After that, he stepped back and left without looking back. Snow, on the other hand, looked as if all the energy had been sucked out of her. She couldn't say a single word. She leaned against the wall and reached out to support herself so that she wouldn't slip. She knew that Zhou Chengguang was serious. Chapter 2065. Zhou Chengguang was like a blackened angel. Cher closed her eyes gently. Sure enough, behind every clean person, there was a dark side. Zhou Chengguang returned to his seat, and Qin Mu looked up gently. "Did you see Cher in the bathroom?" "No." Zhou Chengguang was very considerate as he served her. His breezy smile made people feel very comfortable. At least for Qin Mu, it was comfortable. After a while, Cher returned to her seat. Qin Mu looked worried. "What's wrong with Cher? Why do you look so pale?" "Maybe I didn't sleep well last night." Cher's voice was a little weak. "I'm not used to bed." "Oh," Qin Mu said and didn't say anything else. Under normal circumstances, she was a quiet girl. Zhou Chengguang and Cher were talking very calmly. Neither of them showed any clues until Zhou Chengguang went on the stage again. Cher looked at Qin Mu and asked slowly, "Which step do you think it has reached? Must it be him?" She knew that Qin Mu had a history of depression. She had even tried to commit suicide. No one could figure out why a 10-year-old girl would have such an illness later. Qin Mu was pampered. She did whatever she liked. If she liked to draw, she would draw. If she liked to arrange flowers, she would arrange flowers. If she liked to learn the piano, she would learn it. Fortunately, she was good at all of these and was very talented, but she was not proficient in any of them. Everyone outside thought that Tang Shui was the most pampered one in the Qin and Tang family. In reality, the one who was pampered was Qin Mu, who was the silent one. She also knew that she saw a lot of blood that time. After that, she couldn't sleep for a few days. As soon as she closed her eyes, she felt that Mu was going to leave her. Perhaps from then on, her relationship with Qin Mu became especially good, and Qin Mu also matured early. Cher clearly knew that no one dared to oppose Qin Mu's proposal to be with Zhou Chengguang, because Zhou Chengguang was right. No one dared to provoke Qin Mu. Hearing her question, Qin Mu smiled faintly and nodded. Then, she looked at Zhou Chengguang attentively. Cher looked at her smile. After a long time, she asked softly, "Mu, do you like him very much?" Qin Mu nodded again and then turned to look at her. Her voice was a little sweet. "Do you think he's good too?" Snow's heart was in a mess as she nodded. After the meal, she left with Qin Mu. She told Qin Mu that girls should be more reserved. Qin Mu left with her, but on the way, she sent several messages to Zhou Chengguang. Cher looked at them and didn't say anything. She thought of Gu Mei. Gu Mei was still waiting for Zhou Chengguang inside, but Zhou Chengguang had already chosen Qin Mu. In other words, he had betrayed Gu Mei's sacrifice in spirit. After sending Qin Mu back, it was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Suddenly, Cher wanted to see Gu Mei. She didn't wait for Yi Muyun. She stopped a taxi and called Gu Zhe to make arrangements. Of course, she told Yi Muyun not to know. Gu Zhe guessed that something had happened, but he didn't know what it was, so he had to do it for her. When Cher saw Gu Mei seemed to have known that she was coming. She said with a touch of self-mockery, "Are you here to tell me that he has successfully hooked up with Qin Mu? You already knew?" Cher breathed painfully and looked at Gu Mei in disbelief. Chapter 2066. Cher's face was cold. After a long time, she asked softly, "Are you still going to be loyal to him?" Gume smiled and tilted her head to look at Cher. He likes you. It doesn't matter who he marries. Qin Mu can't control him. Cher squinted her eyes. You mean you'll be the third wheel when you get out? Gume raised her index finger and shushed her. Don't show your cards too early. You've already revealed too much of your plan. But I can understand. Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu are together. If you marry into the Qin family, you can't watch it. What if Zhou Chongguang suddenly goes crazy and tells Qin Mu that he likes you? Do you think Qin Mu can still live? Cher pursed her lips and didn't say anything. You must regret it now, right? Gume chuckled. But there's no medicine for regret in life. Cher, I'm sorry. You don't need to be sorry. Cher looked at Gume coldly. I'm not here to hear you apologize. I'm here to tell you that if you want to hurt Qin Mu, I'll make sure you can't get out of prison for the rest of your life. I can do what I say. Gume was stunned. After a while, she asked softly, Did Zhou Chongguang threaten you? Gume sneered. He's a natural warrior. He can defeat you with one move. You don't dare to take the risk for Qin Mu, right? Cher held her breath. After a long time, she said coldly, It has nothing to do with you. She turned and left without hesitation. Gume was behind her. Tang Cher, is it because of Qin Mu or Yi Muyun that you made such a choice? You love him, don't you? Snow's footsteps came to a halt. After a while, she turned and looked at Gume. You're right. I love him. I can wait. Cher smiled absent-mindedly. I can wait until I can love him. Gume, I wait because I know he loves me. I won't wait forever for a man who doesn't love me. She added, If you sleep with Zhou Chongguang, Guze, your brother will take the punishment for you. Gume chuckled. You are wrong. You should let Zhou Chongguang make mistakes and let Qin Mu give up. Cher looked at her, lowered her eyes, and murmured, I can't afford to gamble. As long as Qin Mu was fine, she and Yi Muyun would be fine. If one day something happened to Qin Mu because of Zhou Chongguang, then she would be finished. She knew that at the crucial moment, she would always make the right choice, because right now, she had no other choice. Just like that, she walked out in a straight line. Guze was waiting for her at the door. She was not surprised. She walked to Guze and said in a low voice, Guze, from now on, you have to cooperate with me. Guze squinted his eyes, and his heart was beating wildly. He heard Cher say slowly, Zhou Chongguang seduced Qin Mu. Guze was shocked. As Yi Muyun's confidant, he knew a little about the Qin family. Now, Zhou Chongguang had really hit Mr. Ye's weak spot. Needless to say, Mr. Yi would give in. No matter how harsh the conditions were, Mr. Yi would agree. Guze was even more shocked. What about Cher and Mr. Yi? Chapter 2067. Guze looked at Cher and didn't say anything for a long time. Cher smiled faintly and said in a quiet voice, Let's leave it at that. Don't let brother know about what happened today. Guze was a little shocked and wanted to say something, but stopped himself. I'll find a chance to tell him. Cher pursed her lips. Guze didn't say anything else and walked downstairs with her in silence. When they got into the car, Guze said calmly, What's wrong with them? Shui'er tilted her head to look at Guze and smiled. Perhaps it's because they've experienced darkness before, so they're desperately trying to grab onto that ray of sunshine. But they've never thought that Zhou Chongguang is the greatest darkness. She leaned her head against the car window and said tiredly, We're always the first to go overboard. When Guze heard this, he knew that she was completely on Mr. Ye's side. But the more she stood on Mr. Ye's side, the more vulnerable she was. The two of them didn't speak along the way. He sent her all the way to Pei Garden. At this time, Yi Muyun hadn't returned yet. This was also the time that Guze had calculated. Guze left quickly, and Cher walked upstairs slowly. She fell on the bed and didn't want to get up. She needed to think about it. Downstairs, Sisterly looked worried. She thought that the young couple had quarreled again, and that Miss didn't look happy. So when Yi Muyun came back, Sisterly nagged again, Go upstairs and coax him. Yi Muyun looked upstairs. What's wrong? He looks a little absent-minded. Sisterly sighed. Hurry up and go up to take a look. Don't throw a tantrum again. Sisterly secretly thought that young master would have to work harder in the future if he married a baby like Mississippi. Just as she was thinking about it, Yumyun had already walked upstairs to his bedroom, but there was no one there. After thinking for a while, he went to Cher's bedroom. She was lying down with a pillow covering her face. Yumyun smiled helplessly and pulled the pillow away from her face. "Aren't you afraid of suffocating?" Cher looked at him pitifully, then threw her little body into his embrace. "Brother." She softly called his name and rubbed against his chest like a little animal. He couldn't resist that kind of warmth. His heart was full, and his voice was slightly hoarse. "What's wrong?" "No, I just want to hug you." She lifted her little face and kissed his chin carelessly, then slowly moved to his lips. She had never been so proactive before, pestering him to the point where his soul almost left his body. Sisterly was wrong. She wasn't throwing a tantrum. She was simply missing him. This kiss was getting hotter and hotter, and Yumyun couldn't resist it. The young man's forehead was soon covered in sweat. He took off the little body in his arms and said in a warm voice, "Cher." He forced himself to calm down because he wanted to stay until the engagement night. He wasn't a saint, and he couldn't wait until the wedding night. However, there were still a few days before the engagement, and he wanted to wait. But there was a ball of fire in his arms, and she kept pressing against him. Slowly, his breathing became erratic. He pressed his hands on her shoulders and said in a warm voice, "Cher, are you sure?" His little one was full of blood. She nodded vigorously and then buried herself in his arms. Yumyun let out a deep breath and looked around. In the end, he still picked her up and walked to his bedroom. Chapter 2068. Cher clutched his shoulders, feeling extremely nervous. She pursed her lips and said, "Brother, I'm scared." He lowered his head and kissed her on the lips. "Cher, it's me. I'm the one who wants you." He kicked open the bedroom door roughly and kicked it again. The sound reverberated through the room. Sisterly, who was downstairs, felt her heart skip a beat. She wondered if something had happened and wondered if she should go up to take a look. Upstairs, in the bedroom that was filled with a masculine scent, Yumyun was experiencing the biggest surprise of his life. Even though he had some understanding of this kind of thing, even though he had watched the films countless times, he only knew the essence of it at that moment. The little thing in his arms was a pure little vixen who had come to seduce him. He indulged himself in it and tried his best to give her the best. However, it was their first time, and the scene was not pleasant at all. The little girl hammered his shoulders, tears welling up in her eyes. "Do you know how to do it?" He kissed her and coaxed her. "Bear with it for a while longer." Fortunately, he was a smart person and soon learned to draw inferences. Soon, the sounds in the bedroom became warm and lingered for a long time. Auntie Lee waited downstairs for a long time, but she didn't see anyone. She felt strange and decided to go upstairs to take a look. In the end, when she reached the young master's bedroom, she heard strange noises. Sisterly was an experienced person. How could she not know what those sounds were? She blushed and did not know what to say. She paused for a while and eventually went downstairs. She stared at the table of dishes in a daze. Then she thought to herself that it was time to prepare supper. The two little ones probably would not come down for a while. As a young man who had just experienced the world, he could not stop for a while. Moreover, the little thing in his arms was begging him again and again. How could he stop? From 6 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., he did not let go of her and kept coming. Finally, when he was exhausted, he held her in his arms and kissed the beads of sweat on her forehead. He asked lovingly, "Are you all right?" The little person was still trembling in his arms, unable to say a word. He was somewhat satisfied and kissed her again. "Does it still hurt?" Cher lay in his arms, feeling a little shy. She didn't make a sound and just bit his shoulder. "It's okay." He narrowed his eyes and chuckled after a long time. "It doesn't hurt. Let's do it again." She was so flustered that she immediately hugged his body and begged him not to. Actually, he was also a little exhausted. It was also his first time, so he didn't know what to do. He only got the feeling towards the end. Just like that, he held her in his arms for a while until the sweat had cooled down. Then, he carried her to the bathroom for a hot bath. When he was wiping her down, Cher's little face turned to the side. "Be gentler." His gaze was deep and his movements were careless. For the first time, the two of them were a little awkward. They didn't even dare to make eye contact, afraid that they would recall the passionate scene just now. After settling her down and wrapping her in the bathrobe, he pinched her little face and smiled. "I'll go downstairs to get some food." Cher replied and watched him go downstairs. At this moment, the entire villa was quiet. Yi Muyun walked up the stairs in a relaxed mood. His heart was filled with an indescribable sense of contentment. Although it was not planned, tonight was undoubtedly wonderful. Chapter 2069. He walked into the kitchen. The supper prepared by Sister Li was still hot. In addition to the usual supper, there were also 2 bowls of tonic soup. Yi Muyun shook his head and smiled, but he still took it upstairs. Pushing open the bedroom door, he saw Cher lying on the bed with her eyes closed. She seemed to be asleep. Her little face was blushing, and her long eyelashes were curled up with 2 drops of tears, which made her look weak and beautiful. The young man who had just tasted her sweetness was naturally filled with tenderness. He put the supper aside, held her soft little body in his arms, and kissed her lips lightly. Cher woke up soon. She blinked and looked at him, and then her face became redder. She called him brother softly. "Eat something," he said hoarsely. He felt that she was already his little wife, and that feeling was very subtle. It was different to have had it before. Cher nestled in his arms obediently. Looking at the soup in front of her, she frowned and asked, "What is this?" Yi Muyun's voice carried a hint of smile. "This is the tonic soup Annie Lee made for us." As soon as he said that, the little girl buried herself in his arms and said shyly, "Did Sister Lee know?" He seemed to know what she was thinking and teased her in her ear, "Baby, if you keep your voice down, probably no one will know." Cher was not convinced. She stared at him, but her voice was lingering. "It's obviously your voice." She thought of the sound he made when he was aroused and immediately covered her face. She never knew that a man's voice sounded better than a woman's. Cher buried herself in his arms and refused to get up. He smiled and pulled her out. "What's so embarrassing about it? It's natural for a man and a woman to have sex. But we're not married yet." She bit her lip, put her sharp chin on his shoulder, and looked at him blankly tonight. She didn't know why she wanted him so much and wanted him to hug her. They had sex naturally, and she didn't regret it. She didn't know when it started, but she was sure that in this life, she would only be with him. After having each other, she felt very good. He hugged her quietly and said in a hoarse voice, "Good girl, get up and eat something." She didn't say anything. He smiled bitterly and pinched her little ear. "Baby, I'm exhausted." Cher got up with a red face and hugged his neck with one hand. "You eat it then." Finally, there was a bowl of seafood porridge for the 2 to share. There was nothing better than a young couple. He hugged her, and neither of them felt sleepy. They hugged each other until it was almost 1 in the morning before they fell asleep. He woke up early, around 6 in the morning. After that, he pressed down on her again without any restraint. In the end, Cher gently closed her eyes and bit her lip. "You're shameless." Yi Muyun didn't care about his face anymore. He forced her to come. It was 9 o'clock in the morning, long past the time he went to the company. This was the first time for Mr. Yi. Guzé's phone calls came one after the other, and he didn't stop. When he was satisfied, he finally let go of her. However, he didn't control himself, and Cher was a little hurt. The young man who had sex for the first time went to the pharmacy again and bought an ointment. He came back and personally applied it on her. He didn't leave and stayed with her the whole morning. Chapter 2070. On the other side, Guzé was holding his phone, extremely surprised. CEO, he had always been unstoppable, rain or shine. However, he was a man after all, and he could quickly figure out the reason behind it. He shook his head and sighed. He had a feeling that this was the calm before the storm. Or rather, Cher was afraid of losing him, so she gave herself to Yi Muyun. On the other side, Yi Muyun hung up the phone and kissed the little girl contentedly before walking downstairs. Annie Lee's face was full of joy, and the other servants also had smiles on their faces. Pei Yuan already had a tacit understanding about what happened last night. At this moment, it felt like the whole world was celebrating. Yumiyun went downstairs to get the newspaper and went upstairs again. Snow was still asleep. She was sleeping soundly, and she seemed to be in perfect health. His fingers gently stroked her little face, and he couldn't bear to let go of her. She seemed to be conscious, and she rubbed her little face against his palm. Yimuyun's heart moved, and he whispered in her ear, "Cher, let's be together for the rest of our lives, okay?" The next life was too far away, and no one knew if it would happen, so he only wanted her to be by his side in this life. The little girl rubbed against him again. She didn't answer, but her actions were very warm. He chuckled deeply and habitually read through the newspaper once. Then he leaned against the headboard and used his phone to deal with work. He had never been so lazy before, but when he was with her, he felt that it was peaceful and beautiful. Cher didn't wake up until 4 in the afternoon. She had just opened her eyes when she was bitten on her cheek, accompanied by a man's hoarse voice. "You're awake?" Yimiyun pressed his forehead against hers and said lovingly, "Sleepy little pig." Cher looked at him for a long time before she said, "How long have I been asleep?" She sat up and looked at the sky outside. The sun was shining brightly. "It's 4 o'clock," he said softly, reaching out to stroke her long hair. "Do you want to take a walk in the garden?" Cher's face was a little pale. She slowly sat up straight and looked up at him. "I want to go out for dinner." After what happened last night, even if she asked him for the moon in the sky, he would probably agree, let alone a meal. Cher lowered her eyes. "The one Mumu took me to yesterday was pretty good." "She's so small, yet you're still following behind her. Let's see how good you are." His words were full of resentment towards iron for not becoming steel. Cher glared at him before getting up and bouncing toward the bathroom. However, she had been injured before, and the moment she bounced, she pulled a little and her face was bitter. He smiled and carried her into the bathroom. He patted her head comfortingly. "Call me when you're done. I won't let you walk today." She blushed and quickly brushed her teeth to hide it. He smiled and leaned against the side, waiting for her. After dawdling for 2 hours, Yimiyun finally went out with his little yellow bun. The family was led by Sister Lee, and they all smiled and said that it didn't matter if they didn't come back. "The old people in the family are so open-minded now," Cher said in a low voice as she fastened her seatbelt. Yimuyun chuckled and said, "They're not as open-minded as the little yellow bun at home." Cher's eyes widened. Was he talking about her? She snorted and said, "No, you can't help yourself. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.